So let's talk about it. I'm really happy to say we did finish chapter one. I feel like chapter one was really, really good. We we kind of saw a sort of floor, um, or two floors of Deleuze's foundation for the book, about how he's using the Baroque not just as a time period or an architecture or an art history kind of thing. He's using it as an operation. The Baroque is an operation of folding, folds everywhere, even in Leibniz's hair. So we're looking at a ton of folds, and what does that mean? Well, he's really trying to get at what matter is in the first chapter. What is matter? How do we understand matter? If we remember earlier, matter is not fully hard and it's not fully fluid. It's always sort of oscillating. And it's also a question of perspective in the way that a boat going really fast can hit water and it feels like a brick wall. So he's kind of trying to analyze matter. He's trying to look at how different kinds of matter interact and the different forces in matter. And he's looking at plastic and elastic forces in order to do that. He's also looking at the organic and inorganic kinds and types of matter. So he's really stressing a lot about matter and specifically how there are different perceptions between different kinds of matter or different types of monads. For example, the monad Noah or Rumpel or Patina has more clarity and more clarity than maybe the monad in a rock that constitutes a rock or something that is inorganic. So there are different kinds of monads, and Deleuze is really just trying to get at the interaction, not between them, because of course they're not necessarily touching each other, but we're going to see that there is some level of interaction between the soul monad and the how that relates to the body. And Rumpel said, I don't know if I have the kind of clarity now because not at this hour pre-coffee. You'd rather put your wager on the rock. That's fair. That's fair. I think there are also points we'll see here about the soul kind of monad also varying in terms of perception. So you're totally right. Maybe when you're sleeping, or maybe if you're very drunk or something, that there's that level of or even coffee, right? There's different levels of perception and distinctness, I guess you could say, or clarity in the soul monads. So we talked a lot about matter the last two readings because of chapter one. Now we're talking about how Deleuze will conceptualize the soul, and it'll be interesting to see the relationship between the soul and the body. So with that being said, let's dive into it. Sorry, I was like about to sneeze. My apologies. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 2, The Folds in the Soul. The ideal genetic element of the variable curve, or of the fold, is the inflection. The inflection is the true atom, the elastic point. That is what Klee identifies as the genetic element of the active, spontaneous line, testifying to his affinity with the Baroque and with Leibniz, and opposing him to Kandinsky, a Cartesian, for whom angles and points are firm, set in motion by an external force. But for Klee, the point as a non-conceptual concept of non-contradiction passes through an inflection. This is the point of inflection itself, where the tangent crosses the curve. It is the point fold. Klee begins with a succession of three figures. Figure 1. The first draws the inflection. The second shows that there is no figure that is exact and unmixed. As Leibniz said, no straight line without curves intermingled, but also no curves of a certain finite nature unmixed with some other, in small arts as well as in large, such that one will never be able to fix upon a certain precise surface in a body as one might if there were atoms. The third figure marks the convex side with shadows, and thereby disengages concavity and its center of curvature, which changes side from one end to the other of the point of inflection. And it looks like we are looking at this figure here, figure 1, Paul Klee lines of inflection. It is written, the top, the active line frolics about freely, a promenade for the promenade, without any particular aim. The agent, a point in motion. Middle and bottom, this same line with forms of accompaniment. So it's already getting real weird real fast, and I'm starting to already like this second chapter. A couple of things that I kind of am noticing a little bit. Um, of course, I like to like take notes because like it's kind of hard to freestyle with this one. Um, but one thing that I do note is the point where he talks about the atom. So we can kind of start there. Where is it at? Where is it? Hold on. There it is. Yeah, the inflection is the true atom, the elastic point. This is kind of an interesting kind of touch here that he's talking about the atom. Is he talking maybe about the monad there? Maybe it kind of seems like that in a way, but when we understand an atom or an inflection point, we're kind of looking at something very specific. And I'll just kind of post the same picture I've always posted about what the inflection point is right there in the chat. So we can kind of start to see how in the first chapter, when Deleuze says that the universe is this infinite curve composed of an infinite number of inflection points, we're kind of seeing how the well, I don't know if he's fully saying, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, that like we're dealing with an infinite number of inflection points, or rather we're always at the level of an inflection point, meaning that we're always in this kind of state of flux. So it's kind of an interesting point. Rempel wrote, "This is immediately reminding me of Zupančič in the in-between, middle of the edge of a sheet of paper from the other week." Yes, there is that level of in-betweenness here, especially with matter. Like, matter's not fully hard, it's not fully fluid here. It's not divisible into the strict kind of in the strict Cartesian sense or separable. There's always this kind of middle. So this basic element, the atom, the elastic point here, is also not something fixed. And people, especially the Cartesian view, will start to view the body, of course, a lot differently than how Deleuze is, as we saw in the first chapter. And he's also mentioning Kandinsky, a Cartesian. He says, for whom angles and points are firm, set in motion by an external force. It's kind of an interesting thing. And he's making a distinction right there between Klee and Kandinsky. So what might the difference be? What is the difference between these two thinkers? This is what Klee identifies as the genetic element of the active spontaneous line, which aligns with Leibniz, and then of course Kandinsky is the opposite here. So I think one thing as we're approaching this too is what we see with Klee at least. Notice we're looking at something active, something spontaneous, and he's also saying genetic, because of course Deleuze is concerned heavily with genesis. So when he's starting with the inflection is the true atom. He's saying that there's always this point of change. As we can see the concave up, concave down, we're dealing with the inflection point. That inflection point is that exact precise moment where there's change, a change in the curvature. So that is almost like how maybe Deleuze is conceptualizing the event. He's saying, the event is where, this movement is bending in a different way. And by taking Klee and Kandinsky, he's saying that how can a line in particular generate movement? Because the movement is not something outside. For the Cartesian level, the points and angles are fixed and movement is needed from the outside. Think about, maybe a god creating, a transcendent god, turning on the clock and letting everything go into motion. Think about like Aquinas's motion, cause and effect argument. It's that very kind of Cartesian view of matter and motion. Whereas here, it is obviously some internal force, which to me is kind of an interesting, I don't know, it's a bit of an interesting view. And this text is to me really amazing. I think I love how Deleuze is focusing so much on matter and movement here. Um, and it's really done so in such a clever way as well. And another thing I kind of wanted to point out here is how here it is. The second figure, it looks like, shows that there is no figure that is exact and unmixed, as Leibniz has said. No straight line without curves intermingled. So let's take a look here. Really interesting. Why? Why does Deleuze make the point here? No line or figure is pure and unmixed. And what we're looking at with folds is we're looking at there being in matter an infinite number of folds that uh, are continuous and mixed together. And I kind of wanted to, from last week, correct myself a little bit in my explanation of folding, because I was thinking about it throughout the week, of how I kind of gave the example of a seed, like a tree seed, and how Deleuze is against the pre-formation of the organism. So he's against the idea that inside of the seed, there's that tree exactly, and that once you plant the seed, it will grow into a pre-formed tree it's already there. In the same way that God knows you can count every hair on your head before you're even born, kind of thing. Like there's this preformed thing. Instead, inside of the seed, there are an infinite number of forces, infinite number of folds that, as the tree seed is planted, there is a relationship between those forces inside of the seed, as well as the outer shell of the seed or the dirt or the environment that it's in. So as the seed and matter is slowly unfolding, making this tree, it's also not divorced or separated from its surrounding environment. So it's not that, and this is where I was kind of also getting confused with Badiou's critique a little bit. It's not that Deleuze is necessarily saying like this is what Badiou says, that Deleuze is taking a piece of paper, folding it an infinite number of times, calling this uh, whatever, like a differential field or plane of consistency or whatever, and then every time you unfold it, it quote unquote produces something new, even though it's all part of the same field. So that's the issue for Badiou. It's that it's this still transcendent unity. There's still this one here. He's just replacing God with a differential field, for example. But what I think is interesting is it's not that it's being unfolded from the seed in a way that's already there. The unfolding is also constituted through folding and its relationship to the environment. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at matter. So if matter itself is continuous and it's always mixed, meaning that it's not a single fold or a single force, but in tandem with an infinite number of them, then that means that there's no perfectly isolated fixed atom or line. There's only curves within other curves, folds within folds within folds. So it looks like to me, how I'm reading this a little bit with this second figure here, is that it's never this kind of perfect, line. But it's kind of just my interpretation here. And when we look at what it says with lines of inflection, it says that the middle and bottom lines, it's the same line with forms of accompaniment. So it's always accompanied by something. Not sure if I'm reading that right, but kind of what I'm thinking. And per usual, the footnotes here are just referring to the texts. And if we see a footnote that has like some good information, we'll of course read it. Um, if we feel good there, we can move on to the next paragraph as well. I do see Patina. I see you're kind of cooking in the chat. So let me know if you want to share something. Okay, I'm just going to start with the next paragraph. Bernard Cash defines inflection, or the point of inflection, as an intrinsic singularity, contrary to extrinsic singularities, maxima and minima. It does not refer to coordinates. It is neither above nor below, neither right nor left, neither regression nor progression. It corresponds to what Leibniz calls an ambiguous sign. It is weightless. Even the vectors of concavity still have nothing to do with a vector of gravity, because the centers of curvature they determine oscillate around it. Thus, inflection is the pure event of the line or the point, the virtual, the ideality par excellence. It will be affected in accordance with the axes of the coordinates, but for the moment it is not in the world. It is the world itself, or rather, the beginning of the world, as Klee used to say, a site of cosmogenesis, a non-dimensional point between dimensions, an event that would be the expectation of an event. This is how the inflection already passes through possible transformations. 3 types of transformation, according to Kesh. And he will be explaining those 3 types in the next 3 paragraphs. But in this paragraph, we are kind of seeing how Deleuze reading Bernard Cash is defining inflection. Inflection is an intrinsic singularity. I think that's a really cool definition of inflection. Why is it intrinsic instead of extrinsic? Right, that's the first thing I'm already thinking about. It just, Deleuze is writing a bit flowery, a little flowery here, right? Look at it is not neither above nor below, nor right nor left, progression, right? So, what does that mean for? What does an intrinsic singularity mean? We don't want to be circular either here, right? By calling it inflection. So, what does that mean? So, when we're taking the inflection, if you look at that picture in the chat, that inflection point, it's that immediate, it's that moment where the concavity changes, where the curve changes. Now, it's an intrinsic singularity solely because of the fact that the inflection can be defined as an inflection. How? From the curve. It's defined within the curve, not some external thing that says that this is now an inflection. It can only be understood in relation to the curvature of the line. So that's kind of how I read it. The inflection, like if you notice, that's an inflection point. It doesn't make a difference if this inflection point is 10 coordinates higher, 10 coordinates lower, further to the right or left or whatever. It's defined purely in relation to the curve itself. So that's kind of my read. Could be wrong there, but it seems like that. And let's look at Rumpel. Rumpel posted this picture. Homework exercise, mark all the inflection points. Well, being nothing becoming, this is actually interesting. Where did you find this? It's cool. It's cool. Cool. Yeah, philosophy memes, of course. Um, so with this though, we're also getting something really, really fascinating here, in my opinion, with this part. Thus, inflection is the pure event, the virtual. It's kind of weird. That intrinsic singularity, if you notice the inflection point as just that point itself, not the entirety of the curve, or the entirety of the line or whatever, that point, it's not necessarily actualized then because it's purely defining the concavity, the curvature of the line. So it's kind of interesting. He's bringing in some like difference in repetition here, but I'm liking the idea of the event. Because remember where this book is coming from? It's coming from Deleuze not being able to resolve a lot of problems in his earlier work with individuation. So, like, without sounding like a broken record, because I said it before, but I'll say it again. It's like if Spinoza is saying that substance is primary to modes, and Deleuze spent a lot of his, academic career trying to not have substance have retain a primacy over the modes. If he's trying to go against that, it's a bit hard with Spinoza because if everything is an expression of one substance, if all finite modes are expression of one substance, then what differentiates them or what individuates them? Where can you draw a dividing line between this or that mode if it's all the same underlying substance? So he's kind of dealing with that transcendence and individuation thing. This is where I think Leibniz offers something unique because the inflection point is the inflection point is the virtual, it's the pure event. It's almost like it's unique compared to an inflection point at a previous moment, for example. Because if the universe or reality is an infinite curve, then that means that the inflection point is always in that kind of state of flux, that there's always movement. So it's always changing. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's the pure event. So I think that this might help us with some of the individuation problem. So if the inflection point is just a turning point, then that means that the actualization of the curve, um, it can be actualized in many different ways. So I don't know if that's clear enough, but the way that I kind of am reading this is just that the curve becomes actualized in different ways depending on the inflection point. So if you take the inflection point there, we can kind of actualize the curve and understand the concavity up or down, for example, because of where the inflection point is. So kind of cool that he's, using virtual actual here as well. And then I'll say the final thing that kind of catches my eye is, of course, the site of cosmogenesis. It's really, really interesting. The inflection is just this beginning of the world in a way. And for Deleuze, if everything's always becoming, everything's always being reborn, everything's always changing, then that inflection point it's not fully formed. It's the point where things can be formed, where directions can emerge, where actualizations can emerge. So I don't know. I really like sight of cosmogenesis, as Klee used to say. Okay, and of course, if you have any interesting comments, just feel free to share. Let's take a look now at the 3 types of transformation according to Cash. And it says that this is how the inflection already passes. So the inflection is passing through 3 possible transformations. The first are vectorial, or by symmetry, with an orthogonal or tangent plane of reflection. They operate according to optical laws and transform the inflection into a cusp. Or in, I don't know how to pronounce this, ogive, a pointed arch.
Ogive.
Arc. Gov? How do you say it? Ogive?
Ogive. That's
Ogive?
how I've been taught it, yeah.
A pointed arch. The ogive expresses the form of a moving body and follows, hugs, the configuration of the lines of flow in a fluid, and the cusp expresses the profile of the floor of a valley when its waters flow together in the unity of a single course. Well, there. This is an interesting one. Well, I guess the first one, we know it's vectorial. And what does that mean? It's kind of it just feels like just so much happened in this like tiny little paragraph. So we're dealing with symmetry. So we're dealing with how the curve itself obviously changes, I guess, through eh, by symmetry. So I'm not fully sure what that would like look like. I'm gonna kind of look this up really quick. The ogive thing. Oh, okay. Interesting. I don't get it. An ogive is most commonly a graphical representation of a cumulative distribution function or cumulative frequency. It is used in statistics to visualize how data values accumulate across intervals and to easily estimate percentiles or medium median values. Interesting. It's used in ballistics, aerodynamics, architecture, construction, of course. Okay, stats. Interesting. Okay. 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 So I'm wondering then if it's like used in this kind of stats way. I mean, if I can just like throw something out there, maybe it's just kind of like how the curvature is mapped in a specific way. Like that's that's all that I can kind of get from this. I myself did like calc it like 8 years ago now, or maybe like 9 years ago now, or something. So and same with stats. So I don't really remember um, anything because I haven't used it since. Um, so so I'm sorry if I can't help here like with any like questions of physics or math or anything. But what we do know, and to make this reading easy, is just that the first kind of transformation of the inflection point is vectorial or by symmetry with a tangent plane of reflection. So somehow we're mapping the the line, we're mapping the curve with a tangent plane, and we're looking at the reflection of it. And then that's one way in which it can be transformed. So that's one way. When we look at the second set of transformations is projective. They express the projection on an external space of internal spaces defined by hidden parameters and by variables or singularities of potential. In this sense, the transformations of René Thom refer to a morphology of the living and provide the seven elementary events: fold, cusp, swallowtail, butterfly, hyperbolic umbilic, elliptic umbilic, and parabolic umbilic. So a little bit of word salad there, but it says that the second one is projective. So we know the first one is vectorial. The second set of transformations here is projective, where it becomes a cusp. So I'm kind of thinking, I mean, butterfly could help us here. So I don't know. I mean, this is just kind of interesting to me because I'm now thinking like a lot about what he's saying here. I'm trying to think maybe if like a better way that we can also look at this is through like architecture, because like my mind is going to like Baroque architecture. So I'm trying to think about like, like the sharpness of a building and how like there can be sharp points, but then there can also be like really smooth curves. So when you look at an o ogive, right? That's what it says. I'm kind of wanting to look at it in terms of architecture. So let me actually just look this. Yeah, okay, let's take a look here in terms of architecture. Um, according to Designing Buildings Wiki, I just posted that picture. It looks like in architecture, that's what it looks like. Yeah, so let's take a look at how there's almost like that cusp. I'm looking at the ceiling, maybe how there's like these sharp points, but what flows from it are like those like smoother curves. So one kind of transformation here that we have with the inflection point is the vectorial one, symmetrical one. The Which makes me kind of think of just like a reflection. Sort of like how if you know how if like you put a mirror, um, like you can place like a mirror, like not like on a wall flat, but like on a side, you can kind of like see how like if you put your hand down on a table and there's like a mirror there, you can see like how your hand like that like reflection. It's kind of like it's like inverted or whatever. I think that's how I kind of read the first kind of inflection point. The second one here is projective. So there's that projective um, transformation where, as we see in that picture, it's making me think of like really, not fixed, but arches and points, and then there's also smooth curves. And then, oh, also welcome for people that are joining. Hey, what's going on, Imagine and Cauliflower? Um, Sorry if my cat's being annoying, but Imagine we're kind of talking about like it's kind of interesting. We're talking about inflection points, and I know you're into math a lot, but if you know anything about inflection points or how they're vectorial or projective, feel free to let us know. And then we have the third kind of transformation here, which I'll read. Finally, the inflection in itself is inseparable from an infinite variation or an infinitely variable curve. This is Koch's curve, which is obtained by enlarging angles in accordance with the Baroque requirement, making them proliferate following a law of homothesis. The inflection passes through an infinite number of angular points and admits no tangent at any of these points, and develops an infinitely cavernous or spongy world, constituting more than a line and less than a surface. Mandelbrot's fractal dimension as a fractional or irrational number, a non-dimension or interdimension. I kind of just want to pause here so we can like look at the yeah, can I just pause here really quick? Because we just have the three types of transformations now. The first is vectorial, second is projective, and the third is something else. Let's see. The inflection is inseparable from an infinite variation or an infinitely variable curve. And what's interesting here is that I believe these curves, like Koch's curve and Mandelbrot, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, those are actually both referenced in 1,000 Plateaus. So that's where they're talking about space. And I'm going to post it right now. Take a look there. I just posted the Koch's curve. And Rumpel, you have your comment. Not check enough. The ceiling fold isn't lined with black death skulls. Correct. What is this element? It's rudimentary. Let's see. And then we have Mandelbrot fractal. And I'll just paste a fractal. How about that? I'll just paste a fractal. So we can kind of see it more up close. So Deleuze is trying to take, it's very clear he's talking a lot about, to me, this reads a lot as a smooth and striated space here. And he's saying that the inflection point is able to transform according to smooth space, striated space, vectors, projection, and I mean, that's kind of how I read it. I can't fully say like that's right, but it's interesting. What's also that other one, the more than a line, less than a surface. Yeah, that's from 1,000 Plateaus too, but there's also another, let me see. There's also like another example that they give, which is really cool, and I'll paste it right now. It's the Sierpinski sponge is another example that they give. I just posted that as well. And how over time with the with that cube, I it's almost like approaching, like, this 0, yet it's always occupying space in a way. I don't really wanna use, like, the word occupying space because they're not trying to say that space is like a container at all, but, I'm using that kind of loosely there. But yeah, in Patina, I really love the fractal thing there. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. Same thing with yours, cauliflower. I think that's very interesting. So those are the 3 kind of ways that the inflection point, transforms. Really quick, I just wanna take a look at the, um, citation. Bernard Cash, Earth Moves: The Furnishing of Territories, inspired by geography, architecture, and the decorative arts. In my view, this book seems essential for any theory of the fold. Really cool that Deleuze said that. I'm actually gonna highlight that in a different color and come back to it. Um, and then he says, on the relation between catastrophe theory and an organic morphogenesis, see René Tom, and the presentation of the 7 singularities or catastrophe events. All right, let us continue with the reading and finish this paragraph. Moreover, the homothesis makes the curve coincide with a change of scale, as in the case of the length of geographical coast. Everything changes when a fluctuation is made to intervene rather than an internal homothesis. This is no longer the possibility of determining an angular point between 2 other points, no matter how close they may be, but rather the latitudes will always add a detour by making every interval the site of a new folding. This is how we move from fold to fold, and not from point to point, and how every contour becomes blurred, as a result of the formal powers of the material which rise to the surface and make themselves manifest as so many detours and supplementary folds. The transformation of the inflection no longer admits any symmetry or privileged plane of projection. It becomes vortical and is produced through delay or deferral rather than through prolongation or proliferation. In effect, the line is folded into a spiral in order to defer the inflection in a movement suspended between sky and earth, which indefinitely moves closer to or farther from the center of a curve, and at each instant takes flight or runs the risk of collapsing. But the vertical spiral does not prevent or defer the inflection without also promising it and making it irresistible in a transversal dimension, a turbulence that is never produced alone, and its spiral follows a fractal mode of constitution by which new turbulences are inserted between the initial ones. Turbulence nourishes itself with turbulences, and it effaces the contour outline, which becomes little more than a watery froth or a flowing mane. It is the inflection itself that becomes vortical at the same time that its variation opens onto a fluctuation and becomes a fluctuation. This man mm, is makes it difficult to understand what he's saying, in my opinion, with Deleuze. Um, cauliflower. Oh, you posted cauliflower? Is that what you're saying? That's on brand with your name. Um, so this to me, a lot's happening here. I think. Uh, what's he trying to get at? Why don't we just like start there? Like, what's the purpose of trying to talk about the transformation of the inflection point? And, you know, why is that, you know, important? I think, I'm just like trying to think a little bit more. When we look at the Coax curve, more than a line, kind of less than a surface stuff, um, or when we look at the fractal, I think maybe the fractal is like one of the best examples that they can give because it's not ever finished, and it's also not something that's innately, fixed. The line itself is never settled. It's always in this state of variation and change, and from there, what we know that depending on the perspective or as the fractal continues, we see even more folds, or we see detours, we see um, just different parts of the space that appear. So it's kind of interesting. Um, what does it mean then, right there, where it talks about here, we move from fold to fold and not from point to point? maybe maybe Deleuze is getting at something here, because I think he's trying to do something, interesting, because he's clearly critiquing kind of the Cartesian view, right? Uh, Cauliflower wrote, "What is this guy talking about?" Yeah, I know. It's we're trying to figure out too. Um, Rumpel, causal versus acausal inflections. I don't know. Do you want to expand on that? Okay, okay, okay. Um, let's see. Causal versus acausal inflections. I think, yeah. I mean, a lot of this is also dealing, of course, with like I mean, of course, Deleuze is bringing in causality, in my opinion, here, right? Like he's getting rid of the idea that like matter is fully fixed and is only affected by the external, by an external force. He's kind of course, talking about how there are these internal forces at work too. So I think that there's the kind of that interesting view of causation here, to say the least. So, the form here is not at all developed by connecting fixed points. So with a line. So if you take 2 points, connect it with a line, now you have a line, you can create surfaces, so on and so forth. So he's trying to get away from the idea that of this view of mathematics, like that view of geometry, for example, that views everything as just a completely kind of fixed point that we then connect and then can like have a basis for understanding the world. He's trying to get at matter in terms more of the process of folding and unfolding. And we can see that through um, Mendelbrot's fractal or Sierpinski's sponge or whatever, that at each kind of interval there are these new dimensions being added. New, yeah, that's how I read it. And yeah, haha, Noah reading every comment, laughing emoji. Is counting the fold versus the point like as a kind of unit? Yeah, that's interesting. Like I think for Deleuze, it's almost like it's kind of reminding me a little bit of like Bergson here, right? Like if you look at space as something completely striated, like how they talk about it in A Thousand Plateaus, you're looking at space in terms of something maybe like Zeno's paradox, where you have a line that has, an infinite number of points. It's completely, easily divisible. Um, but even in Zeno's paradox, you don't have access to motion because you're viewing space purely in that kind of striated way. So the I think what Deleuze and Guattari would say against that kind of counting of points in space akin to Zeno is, yeah, Zeno makes sense only if you're viewing him from the level of striated space. But space is not just striated. Space is also smoothed. So the true infinitesimal point would be this extreme uh, striation, axiomatization of space per se. But there's also this level of space that we're kind of looking at here where maybe there's something more qualitative as well. In the same way that when Bergson talks about time, is time purely scientific and mathematic? And like, is that just the way we understand time as something we can divide, minute, 30 seconds, 15, dot, dot, dot? Or is there maybe some qualitative aspect here as well when we're dealing with space? So obviously people come across this reading or whatever, they're going to be like, yeah, so this guy doesn't, understand like math and science that well, which is true. What we can gather from this is that when Deleuze is specifically writing about reality being an infinite curve, when we can look at the inflection point as the virtual or as the pure event, and how that is a condition for actualization of reality, then I think we are, um, well, or actualization of the curve. Then I think we're really getting somewhere with how we're viewing space and time and whatnot. Um, but I think I'm okay with this here. We can also take a look quickly at the footnote, Benoit, Mandelbrot, the fractals. he says, on the spongy or the cavernous, see Jean Perrin's text cited by Mandelbrot. I'm also going to highlight this because I think that would be cool to look at. From different points of view, Mandelbrot and Tom are both strongly influenced by Leibniz. It's kind of weird that he wrote that. When he says from different points of view, he's not even saying like whose point of view. He's just kind of saying like, yeah, like I guess you can say that they're both influenced. I don't know if it's like true that they are. Um, Classic Deleuze. Okay, and then 38, 39. This is the way in which this author and this author describe their Baroque spiral according to the statue by Balthazar Permoser, the apotheosis of Prince Eugene, figure 1. And then lastly, from inflection to turbulence, see Mandelbrot fractals, chapter 8, and Cash Earth Moves, which insists on the phenomena of the deferred. Yeah, Mandelbrot seems to be like a big influence for Deleuze, so definitely someone I think we should probably look into more for good Deleuze scholarship. All right, let's move on to the second paragraph if no one has any comments. And please feel free to add. Even if something is completely off or wrong, I mean, I might not fully notice it, and I'm probably off here too. So it's kind of like a group effort. Okay, let's do it. The definition of Baroque mathematics appears with Leibniz. They take as their object a new affection of variable magnitudes, which is variation itself. In a fractional number, or even in an algebraic formula, it is not variability that is considered as such, since each of these terms has, or must have, a particular value. The same does not hold, however, for the irrational number in the calculus of series that corresponds to it, or for the differential quotient in the calculus of differences, in which variation becomes actually infinite, the irrational number being the common limit of two convergent series, one of which has no maximum and the other no minimum, and the differential quotient being the common limit of the relation between two quantities in the process of vanishing. But in both cases, we can see the presence of an element of curvature acting as a cause. The irrational number implies the fall of a circular arc onto the straight line of rational points. It denounces the latter as a false infinity, a simple indefinite made up of an infinity of, I always mispronounce this word, lacuna? I always mispronounce it. This is why the continuum is a labyrinth and cannot be represented by a straight line, since the line is always intermingled with curves. Between 2 points A and B, no matter how close they may be, there is always the possibility of constructing a right isosceles triangle, whose hypotenuse goes from A to B, and whose summit C determines a circle that crosses the straight line between A and B. The arc of the circle is like a branch of inflection, an element of the labyrinth which makes the irrational number a point fold where the curve encounters the line. It is the same for the differential quotient with the point fold A that retains the relation C/E even when these two magnitudes vanish. This is also the relation between a radius and a tangent that belongs to the angle in C. In short, there is always an inflection that turns a variation into a fold, and that carries the fold or the variation to infinity. The fold is power, as we see in the irrational number that passes through an extraction from a root, and the differential quotient that passes through the relation of a magnitude and a power as the condition of variation. Power itself is act, the act of the fold. Really quick, let's take a look at that figure 1. It was also referenced in the footnote. Is this the fold? Pretty interesting stuff. What do we think here about this kind of notion of like variation? That's kind of what I'm seeing the most in this long paragraph. He's talking about Baroque mathematics, magnitudes. What can we take from this? Well, what makes Baroque mathematics, we could start there, different from mathematics of the previous era, maybe mathematics of ancient times. So clearly the new object here is variable magnitude of, they take as their object a new affection of variable magnitudes, which is variation itself. So when we look at, hold on, give me one sec. I'm trying to find this. they make a difference here in A Thousand Plateaus between distance and magnitude. So I'm going to post a quote from A Thousand Plateaus here. Chat. They write, distances are not, strictly speaking, indivisible. They can be divided precisely in cases where the situation of one determination makes it part of another, but unlike magnitudes, they cannot divide without changing in nature in each time. So let's kind of take a look here at how they're sort of looking at magnitudes. So let's take maybe a better example like speed right now. Let's say you're driving a car and you're going 100 miles an hour. For Deleuze and Guattari, speed is an intensity because it cannot divide without changing in nature. 100 miles per hour is not 50 miles an hour times 2, which is a bit kind of weird to understand because the intensity, the speed of 100 miles per hour is itself wholly unique compared to 50 miles an hour, and just 250 miles an hour is not going to equal 100. Same thing with something like maybe temperature. 100 degrees outside is, going to change in nature when you divide it in half. 100 degrees outside, divide in half, it changes in nature because now 50 degrees is a lot less hot. So when you look at something like speed, and uh, I think that's a great intensity. I'm trying to think of other examples they give. Temperature. Let's also take a look at distance here. And this is where I think Deleuze is going to do a lot of work with, and he already has been, with space. If you look at something like distance, he's going to argue that don't look at it in terms of like a graph where that distance, no, or we can, I guess. I guess we can. He would say like a distance of 5 points versus 10 points is the same thing here. When you change the distance, you're going to be, if you divide the distance, you're also dividing the nature of it as well. So sorry if that's a bit confusing, but that's kind of how I'm reading this, is that when we're looking at variation, when we're looking at the transformation of the inflection point, or we're looking at matter itself, that is how Baroque mathematics operates. It's not the kind of fixed geometry like someone like Zeno is dealing with. We're looking at it a lot different. Rumpel, you say pressure. Is pressure and intensity? I think to me that makes sense. I'm not fully sure. I'm just trying to think of other examples that they give. But yeah, that's the intensity is must, or cannot divide without changing in nature each time. So distance for them is very similar, and that's where they're going to be kind of, that's how they would talk and resolve Zeno's paradox. They actually make a reference to Achilles and the tortoise in a footnote a single time. Then when we're looking through, well, what isn't an intensity? That would be magnitudes. And what would that look like? See, I have like personal notes for ATP here. Um, the magnitude of a vertical line between 2 points can be compared to the magnitude of a horizontal line between 2 other points. Its determinations are magnitudes. So when you're looking at magnitudes, it looks like the determinations are independent of the situation. So let's see here. Yeah, there's the quote. So you can take, a horizontal and vertical line and put it anywhere on the graph, and you can still compare both of the lines without it changing the nature. Whereas I think when you take something like speed or distance or temperature, it's a little bit different because it 100% like you can't evaluate their magnitudes independently of the situation that they're in, if that makes sense. Um, so back to this, without like going a whole 1,000 plateaus route, this is just making me look at 1,000 plateaus and Deleuze's concept of differential calculus and like having a baby from those. It's kind of how I'm reading it. He kind of he 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 mentioned the labyrinth. I don't remember where it was, but that did catch my eye. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. That point did catch my eye, though. I kind of wanted to talk about it. I don't know if I could find it, but regardless, it's kind of an interesting view of Baroque math and variation. However, what does it mean here? The fold is power. I mean, Deleuze obviously knows that saying something like this is going to carry different kind of weight because power is such like a loaded concept as it is. So I'm kind of curious if anyone has any thoughts on why the fold is power. With someone like Foucault, power is an action upon an action, um, where it's diffuse, it's decentralized, it's not possessed but exercised. Uh, for Deleuze here, fold is power. Power itself is the act of the fold. So maybe he's like playing with power here. It doesn't seem to be in like previous discussions he's had about power. So maybe he's just trying to get at that the fold is just this active force, this operation that has the capacity for variation, meaning that the fold is able to go into infinity and it allows the line to become a curve. Something like that. Um, Imagine writes, maybe the fold is productive, as in it generates curves and lines. And I think that you're totally right. I think to me, that's how I read it as well. It's that this fold is this capacity for variation. And that capacity for variation implies that there are a transformation of inflection point, how that changes the curve or where the curve changes in terms of concavity. So I think that makes sense to me. Yeah, totally. Yeah, this reading for sure compared to chapter one is a lot more brutal. I tried to take notes um, earlier about it as we go through, but like even when I was trying, I was like, okay, hopefully I can chat with some people here to figure it out. So I don't know if anyone has any other comments here. There's like a lot of weird math stuff happening. Okay. And Patina writes, perhaps something to do with how the fold is a part of how the virtual passes into the actual. So its power is to do this. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take here. How does the virtual become actualized? And we saw that the inflection point for Deleuze is the virtual. That is what then creates the conditions for the curve. And with what you're saying, well, what are the conditions for the curve here? Like, what's that process? That's all the fold. And if you think about it too, Patina, like the way I read it a little bit is the folding and unfolding process also gives rise to the inflection point, which makes it also so interesting. Um, and like last week when I gave that example of the seed, Deleuze is not saying that inside of the seed is the preformed tree, but inside of the seed, it's matter folded upon matter folded upon matter. Super, super small. And then when the seed is planted, it unfolds and interacts with the environment through internal and external forces. I kind of look at the inflection point in the curve almost in a similar way. Because I don't think Deleuze is at all trying to give priority to the inflection point. I don't think he's trying to give that primacy because then that's going to cause the problems of a lot of his framework. That inflection point isn't God. Um, but at the same time, the inflection point and its transformation as we're seeing, how what gives rise to that? If anything. I think that's the tricky part with Deleuze. The virtual becomes actual, but I don't think he's saying at all that the actual becomes virtual. I don't know if anyone has any comments on that. So yeah, is the inflection point in the curve, are they interdependent? I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to ask here. And or is it more of a question of causality that the inflection point then gives rise to the curve? You see what I mean? Right, imagine inflection points produce curves. Thank you. So it's not necessarily interdependent. Or is it? Because imagine, can you have the inflection without the curve?
Well, like, I guess for an inflection point to exist, there needs to be like a curvature-like shape, right? Because it needs to go from like going down, like the line's going down, and then you switch at a certain point, and then you start going up, and then that like bottom, I guess the low point is where the inflection point is. Yeah, something like that, right? Like where the concavity changes, then that is where I guess a curvature happens.
Right, right. So it's kind of interesting. It's like I don't think he's necessarily giving primacy to the virtual, or to the actual, but I think he's kind of showing the interrelated relationship between them. And I think you're totally right there that inflection points produce curves, and they have three possible transformations, which is what we saw above. And even if we don't understand each part of it, we do know that the inflection point is what he understands as the virtual, and the curve itself, the concavity, whatever, is all determined, or in a process of determining via the inflection point. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, let's take a look at the next one now. When mathematics takes variation as its object, it is the notion of the function that comes to the fore, and the notion of the object also changes and becomes functional. In some particularly important mathematical writings, Leibniz posits the idea of a family of curves that depend on one or several parameters. Instead of seeking the unique straight tangent at a unique point for a given curve, we can go about seeking the tangent curve in an infinity of points within an infinity of curves. The curve is not touched, it is touching. The tangent is neither straight, nor unique, nor touching, but now becomes a curve in infinite touched family, the problem of the inverse of tangents. There is thus a series of curves that imply not only constant parameters for each one and for all of them taken together, but the reduction of variables to a single and unique variability of the tangent or touching curve, the fold. The object is no longer defined by an essential form, but attains a pure functionality as declining a family of curves framed by parameters, inseparable from a series of possible declinations, or from a surface of variable curvature that it itself describes. Let us call this new object an objectile. As Bernard Cash has shown, this is a very modern conception of the technological object. It refers not to the beginnings of the industrial era, when the idea of the standard mill still maintained a semblance of essence and imposed a law of constancy, the object produced by the masses and for the masses, but to our current situation, where the fluctuation of the norm replaces the permanence of a law, where the object has a place only within a continuum through variation, where the production line or computerized machine is substituted for the method of stamping. The new status of the object no longer relates the object to a spatial mold, that is, to a form-matter relation, but to a temporal modulation, which implies a continuous placing into variation of matter as much as a continuous development of the form. In modulation, there is never a break in the process for withdrawal from the mold, because the circulation of the supportive energy amounts to a permanent withdrawal. A modulator is a continuous temporal mold. To mold is to modulate in a definitive manner. To modulate is to mold to modulate is to mold is a continuous and perpetually variable manner. Is not Leibniz defining modulation when he says that the law of the series posits curves as the trace of the same line in continuous movement, continually touched by the curve of their contest? This is a conception of the object that is not only temporal but qualitative, inasmuch as sounds and colors are flexible and taken in modulation. The object is mannerist and no longer essentialist, it becomes an event. Okay, he cites Michael Serres here, Leibniz's two principal texts. Quote, in comparing the curves of a series to each other or considering the crossing of one curve over another curve, certain coefficients are very constant or permanent, which do not remain solely on one but on all curves of the series, the others being variable. And clearly, for the law of the series of curvatures to be given, a unique variability has to subsist in the coefficients to such a point that, if several variables appear for all the curves in a principal equation explaining their common nature, other accessory equations are needed to express the dependence of the variable coefficients for which all the variables could be removed from the principal equation except one. Okay, so kind of an interesting thing here, and I think he's actually in the first sentence. I think he's getting a lot in here. Imagine you wrote, "He really just be writing things, crying, crying, pray." Yes, of course. Sometimes I feel like it's just unnecessary too. But I think that what he's doing here is actually really interesting. If you look at that first sentence here, he's saying that because math now is focused on Baroque mathematics, focuses on variation as its object. The function that comes to it is the notion of the function that comes to the fore. So I think what he's saying here is that that we are now looking at variation in terms of function, which he says here it becomes functional, rather than some kind of fixed thing that we can fully uh, that we can kind of fully grasp almost in a way. Um, because if he's saying that everything is continuous here, then it's almost like the object that we're dealing with is it's rather than trying to say what is it, it's what is it doing, what is its genesis. And I think we kind of see that a lot throughout Deleuze's work when he's talking about essence. He's not really concerned with essence as this primary thing. He's not viewing math in kind of like in the manner that Plato might. He's really trying to say, rather than trying to say, what is it as defining a kind of essence, he's trying to say, what does it do? How did this emerge? So I think the Baroque mathematics is kind of just looking at the emergence of the curve. I think it's trying to look at the parameters of it. I'm not sure if that fully makes sense, but I do like this sentence here. And for anyone who's maybe good at math, also feel free just to comment or say something. He says, there is thus a series of curves that imply not only constant parameters, but the reduction of variables to a single and unique variability of the tangent or touching curve, the fold. Kind of curious as to what people make of that sentence. Imagine wrote, I can show a family of curves framed by parameters on a graph. Yeah, do you want to? Yeah, thank you.
Let me show my screen real quick.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if y'all can see it, but
Yeah, totally. I just clicked on your, that's kind of cool that multiple people can share their screen in Discord, actually. I didn't even know that.
yeah, so I think when he mentions like a family of curves and like parameter, you see like this coefficient, like a, you can change it around. Like the base function is still the same, right? It's still x squared. Like it's still this parabola shape, but once you change this parameter, you can actually get various types of parabolas, like various like kinds, and there's infinite of them because like you can change a to like whatever number, right? Like a could be whatever, and then you can get a parabola like that. But I think that's what he means by like parameter and the function. Because when he says functional, I don't think he's talking about like it serves some purpose. I think functional might just mean that like it just means like a mathematical function. And then a tangent is where like a line intersects the curve at one point. Like a tangent line is basically like if I were to draw a line along maybe like this point, like this, it would be straight across, like this. Oh wait, oops. Like this is what a tangent line is. Like it touches the curve at exactly one point. So maybe like when he talks about a tangent to a family of curves is where you can find the tangent line to like a whole family of functions. Maybe like you take a derivative of this, and then you can make a whole family of functions off of that because a is still a parameter that you can change. Like I might not
Yeah,
be explaining it that
no,
well.
no, no. I think this makes sense. So question then. Let's say you'd added an additional parabola on like two, right? So like you do you like on the x. Like if you put it on two, because right now it's on zero. That's where the point is. But I'm saying like not like that. I meant like if you just copied the parabola and moved it over on the same line, on the same tangent line. Like I wonder if what Deleuze is trying to get at a little bit, it's like what if he's trying to say like that tangent line is able to kind of like follow a litany of parabolas at a single point. I don't know if that's like making a ton of sense, but like imagine there's another parabola somewhere on the graph that's also
Like
touching that
this.
tangent line.
Like you can change the x around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. But but when he says that there's a family though, I think my confusion a little bit here is like, hold on, where's the family thing? Yeah, family of curves. So does that mean that that there's obviously multiple, you know? Is it like multiple at the same time? So like multiple parabolas, you know, multiple um all being touched by the same tangent. You know, like that's curious if that's what he's trying to say. I'm not sure. I'm really happy that you're sharing your screen though, because it's kind of I don't know, it's making me I mean, I know some people say philosophers or whatever shouldn't touch math and like mathematicians should keep, you know, their distance from philosophy or whatever. But I do think that there's a lot that we can take here from this, you know. Yeah, so this is cool. This is cool. Thanks for sharing. Um So when he says there is a series of curves that imply not only constant parameters, but the reduction of variables to a single and unique variability of the tangent or touching curve, the fold. So I think what you showed us um, kind of gets to that. I think what you showed us is really getting to that to show how you can have a family of curves and how the curves are always in a state of flux or change. But there's almost like this the very the variable can still be reduced, however, to just the process of folding or where the tangent is, if that makes sense. Um, if I can also throw a picture in, um, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but because again, I'm not the biggest mathematician at all, but I'm posting a picture of Riemannian space, which is what D&G talk about in A Thousand Plateaus, about how that's a smooth kind of space. Space, yeah, it's smooth space. And then what we attempt to do as well is we map it out. Um, we can map it out through tangents, where we can try and map out a smooth space with kind of like a striated method as well, if that kind of makes sense. And they also talk about the process of translation as well. If I can find this really quickly. Yes, I just found it. And this might be interesting. Um, they talk about how there it is. Translation is an operation that undoubtedly consists in subjugating, overcoding, metricizing smooth space, and neutralizing it, but also in giving it a milieu of propagation, extension, refraction, renewal, and impulse, without which it would perhaps die of its own accord, like a mask without which it could neither breathe nor find a general form of expression. I think what they're trying to say is that we can kind of, like in math, we're able to uh, map like smooth space in striated terms, if that kind of makes sense. And the reason why I kind of bring that up is because I wonder here with the kind of curvature, he is obviously getting at like a smooth space. He's getting at a kind of smooth type of mathematics. But he's also not saying, remember here, he's also not saying that it's like pure chaos. He's not saying like there isn't some level of order. In fact, some really, really great philosophers have called Deleuze a hyper rationalist. Like he is drawing from math for a reason. So I think he's kind of getting at here a little bit about how you have this kind of Baroque view of space, but that doesn't necessarily mean it can't also be mapped out along that its variation can't like be mapped out, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, and I'll also add this quote in here. Um, Nothing is ever done with. Smooth space always allows itself to be striated, and striated space reimparts a smooth space, with potentially very different values, scope, and sign. Perhaps we must say that all progress is made by and in striated space, but all becoming occurs in smooth space. And remember, when we're talking about striated and smooth space, it's not like you have striated space on half of the universe and smooth space on the other half. We're talking about the same space, but from different kind of perspectives here. And I think when we're looking and reading Leibniz, he's obviously looking at space here with how he's talking about inflection points and curves, and the universe as an infinite curve. He's really showing like the smoothness of it all here. And I kind of am reading some of this as like trying to map that out. Um, Yeah, really great. There was also like something else I did like over here about like the technological object. Like notice here he writes about how Hash discusses the technological object, which I think is really interesting, and it almost makes me think about Deleuze's reading of Simondon and technology. So he says it's not the question of the beginnings of an industrial area, like factory work and objects produced for the masses, but to our current situation, where the fluctuation of the norm replaces the permanence of a law, where the object has a place only within a continuum through variation, where the production line or computerized machine is substituted for the method of stamping. Does anyone know what stamping means there? Like, part of me is also like when he's talking about the object here, and with how at least Simondon talks about the object, is it's kind of very easy to look at the human and the technological object as as separated. We go to the factory, we use the tools, and then we go home. Like just kind of a classical view of the object, the technological object. But with how D and G are viewing the object, is they're kind of looking they're looking at the human and the technological object as this kind of coextensive process, whereby what it means or how humans are produced and how they are organized is shaped by and through technology and vice versa. So they're both co-produced in this very unique way. So I kind of like how he's talking about the technological object and in variation. Again, I know I'm probably importing and definitely importing a different read on it. Um, but it makes me think about that is all I'm trying to say. Um, yeah, I mean, this is also just kind of a brutal section, especially if um, given the fact that I'm not just sure how many mathematicians are here. And I imagine you're totally helping, by the way. Um, all right, maybe like one more paragraph or two, and then I can cry myself to sleep after this reading. But let's see here. Yeah, let's do it. If the status of the object is profoundly changed, so also is that of the subject. Oh, I love this here. Already starting off really great. If the status of the object is profoundly changed, so also is that of the subject. We must, from an inflection or a variable curvature to the vectors of the curve. Wait, hold on. We pass from an inflection or a variable curvature to the vectors of the curve on its concave side. Starting from a branch of inflection, we determine a point which is no longer the point that traverses the inflection, nor the point of inflection itself, but the point where the perpendicular lines meet the tangents in a state of variation. It is not exactly a point, but a place, a position, a site, a linear focus, a line born of line. It can be called a point of view inasmuch as it represents the variation or the inflection. Such is the foundation of perspectivism. Perspectivism does not mean a dependency with regard to a subject defined in advance. On the contrary, a subject will be what comes to a point of view, or rather what remains in the point of view. Thi- This why this is why the transformation of the object refers to a correlative transformation of the subject. The subject is not a subject, but a superject, as Whitehead says. The subject becomes a superject at the same time that the object becomes an objectile. Between variation and point of view, there is a necessary relation, not simply by reason of the variety of points of view, although there is such a variety as we shall see, but first of all because every point of view is a point of view on a variation. It is not the point of view that varies with the subject, at least in the first instance. On the contrary, it is the condition under which a possible eventual subject grasps a variation, metamorphosis, or a something equals X, anamorphosis. Perspectivism in Leibniz, but also in Nietzsche, in William, and Henry James, in Whitehead, is indeed a relativism, but not the relativism we believe it to be. It is not a variation of truth according to the subject, but the condition under which the truth of a variation appears to the subject. This is the very idea of Baroque perspective. I feel like this paragraph is just like almost like a palate cleanser from like everything else we've been doing. Like this to me, I really like, because to me, I mean, this feels like we had to like trek to get to this point. And now I feel like this is also where Deleuze gets to kind of be a bit more political, as he, always has really been, in his works too. I'm kind of curious, what do people think about the object changing in the last paragraph to now how the subject is now a superject? I don't know if anyone has thoughts there. We're looking at perspectivism and how, from what I'm taking from this, how each monad perceives the world from its own unique perspective. Each monad perceives the world from its own unique perspective. So what is perspectivism? What is the soul? When we say the Noah monad, what is that? Like Noah, what we call Noah can lose many body parts and still be Noah. You can cut Noah up into a billion, million, trillion pieces or whatever, and still not, you know, cut the Noah monad in half, right? It's still present. And that's what Deleuze says about the insect, right? The last reading. You can cut an insect up into a billion pieces, but there's still that monad that has a special relationship with the body. That doesn't mean that the Noah monad owns Noah's body. This isn't like a Lockean kind of reading. Um, this is not a Lockean reading where your body is your property, that there's this you that has ownership. But there is still a unique relationship between the soul monad and something we call the body. I know we're fully not there yet, but I'm already starting to kind of see the perspectivism here and how he's using math to get there. Just, I want to hear people's thoughts. Um, Welcome, Rise Noza. Hope you're doing well. Resnoza wrote, "Rest in peace, Noah Monad." Um, that insect line that Deleuze has, like, you can cut up the insect into, like, a billion pieces, and you still haven't cut the soul monad or whatever. Um, um, I forget if it was, like, an ant or something, but, it kinda reminds me of, like, that one meme of, like, that, like, human body that's, like, divided into, like, a billion pieces or something. Um, but yeah, I hope you're doing well. Patina says, "Seems like the monad envelops a multiplicity of perspectives or even expresses them under its unity." Dang, that is heat. Yeah, I mean, how does it envelop a multiplicity of perspectives? It just must be the process of folding and unfolding, right? I mean, is it that there are these forces at work that allow for multiple perspectives? Or maybe a better question, why would the monad have a multiplicity of perspectives rather than just one? I mean, if it's one monad, one soul, the Noah monad is different than the Rumpel monad, is different from Patina's monad. And we all have different perspectives on the world. So we are limited in our perspective. Why not just one? Yeah, imagine. I can read this out here. Imagine writes, "I don't know if I'm right, but in my understanding of Nietzsche, perspectivism is falsifying the objective view," quote, object in there, "because every point of view is, quote, subjective. A subject becomes a superject when it collects many perspectives and varies its points of view based on what it encounters. The subject's point of view is constantly varying, inflecting. It is a single and unique variability that internalizes other points of view to change its own as a reaction." Uh, I think that you're totally. I can't really comment fully on the Nietzsche part, given I've only read like parts of Twilight of the Idols, right, and the Antichrist. But that was only when we did those readings. Imagine like a couple years ago or a year ago or whatever. But but yeah, you're saying here. I think what it makes sense. It's perspectivism kind of gets away from this, view almost that there is this object out in the world or out in the universe that we can divinely kind of understand, that it is the thing that is truth that we need to find, and that the reality is, especially for someone like Nietzsche, these points of view are subjective, and that to me makes sense. When Deleuze says that a subject becomes a superject, yeah, he's drawing from Whitehead there. And Whitehead is a great writer, and he writes a lot of what his deal is process philosophy. So he is getting away from substance-based philosophy in his works. Like he criticizes the idea of why we even need to, theorize and think through substance, and rather sort of understands life, I would say, or reality more in kind of a Taoist view. Um, Ironically, of course, saying that there's like a holistic Taoist view might have its own thing, but yeah, so he's saying that life is this process, that there is no stable subject that studies an object, but rather throughout a subject's life, the subject is encountering all sorts of different experiences. So so that means that it's always being varied itself, all the time. So it's not a fixed thing. Resnoza wrote, "I missed quite a bit, so I don't have much to say for where the text is going with this. But I really like how smoothly this leans into Deleuze's general treatment of the subject as produced in Variation, Nietzsche and Philosophy Reading When." Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of interesting. You kind of joined at like a perfect time. We just finished like reading a lot of how he is talking about math, how he's talking about lines and tangents and curvatures and inflection points, and he just sort of is now getting into how for the Baroque view of mathematics and the Baroque view of space, the object is changed. We're not looking at a fixed point anymore. We're looking at variation. That is what defines Baroque mathematics. So if the object changes, then guess what? The subject of mathematics and space or whatever also has to change too. And so now we're kind of seeing, this subject object distinction kind of changing. Let me let me ask this though, for the in regards to this paragraph. Do we kind of see a subject object divide still? Or is he trying, with his perspectivism here, is he trying to erase the subject object divide? Um, I'm not sure. Rumpel writes, going straight to Zupanchik here. Yeah, like the in betweenness maybe of it all. Yeah, totally. Uh, Gosh, honestly, that was a great read, by the way. Seriously, some of the best psychoanalysis I feel out there. I liked it.
Also, this idea that perspectivism does not mean a dependency with regard to the subject defined in advance. So it is not like my point of view and my perspective are the same, drawing literally on that reading from the other week. And then continuing, on the contrary, a subject will be what comes to a point of view, or rather what remains in the point of view. This screams to me that chapter in on Noontide from Zupančič.
Well, yeah, right. Both also drawing from Nietzsche, too. Um, yeah, really interesting. I like how you're tying it to that reading we did as well. It's almost like here though, notice too that the subject is emerging or arising. The subject is not something that we can look at and say that is the same. It's that the subject is understood in terms of some kind of perspective. And what does that look like?
Yeah,
Patina
it's
says,
not
yeah, sorry.
it's like it's not strictly causal or even strictly perfectly linear in the sense that I, subject A, have an event at which point I emerge out the other end. I'm now subject A transformed, subject B. There is something more interesting going on here.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I mean, when you're looking through Deleuze's work too, when we're talking about subjectivity, he's talking about in each moment, the body, the like that. This is his transcendental empiricism too. Like I'm seeing that it's that he is saying that the senses and the body are affected, and that causes the subject to continuously be reborn through experience. So there is no fixed subject, but there is still a kind of subject here, right? And that's where it gets tricky. What is that? What is subjectivity if it's not fixed? I mean, we can say very easily, oh, like Deleuze talks about a decentered subject, but like, what does that mean? Patina writes, the point of view is in the body, uh, says Leibniz, page 10. So I'm curious about this since it seems the POV isn't even from the subject's POV. Yeah, well, look at like the Noah monad can have clarity, but it's almost as if that clarity can only exist by having a relation to the world, and the way to have a relation to the world is through the body. So the body, the POV of the body, the seeing, the hearing, the touching, everything, that is a perspective in the world. Is that the Noah soul monad's perspective? See, like, are we back to ownership, like a John Locke kind of thing? So, not sure. Imagine says the subject has a POV, doesn't it? To which Patina responds, although I'm not entirely sure it is the same as the bodies. Imagine says, I agree. I'm thinking body could be in a physiological sense. Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at how he's talking about reality being an infinite curve too, at what point does my body become my body or not? we're able to say, like, I, Noah, have legs and arms and organs and whatnot. I am not a chair or a bed or whatever. But at what point am I able to make that distinction? Especially if you look at something like Anti-Oedipus with a connective synthesis, or everything, or even Spinoza, right? Everything's one substance. So at what point does my body end and begin? And how does the soul relate to that? Why is that soul monad specifically in relation to the point of view of the physiological or biological body? It's kind of an interesting point there. Really quickly, on 42, I should have looked, but when we were talking previously about the technological object, he cites Gilbert Simondon. I don't know. I should have checked that out. And then he writes about anamorphosis. He says anamorphosis pertains to distorted projections of images that are seen correctly from an oblique point of view or in reflection on a mirror placed at an indicated area. Anamorphic perspective characterizes the celebrated death's head that Hans Holbein inserts in a diagonal fashion in The Ambassadors. It became, as Jurius Baltrigus has noted, a field of experiment and perspective in early 17th century France, in a mode of visual trickery that can be seen in pictures that constitute parlor games in French society of the same period in Anamorphosis. Anamorphosis is synonymous with Baroque art and literature. That looks like a little translator's comment. It's kind of interesting there. Might go back to it. And then it's kind of, I'm already seeing footnote 44 talking about Guerreau. So it's just like Deleuze and Guerreau. So interesting. This I know I'm jumping ahead, but the space point in the void in Leibniz, I've actually started to translate it through Google Translate and some other LLMs and stuff I don't speak French, but could be also cool to read this and check it out. It's not the longest piece, but that's an early Guerreau piece about 20 years before his reading of Spinoza. So it's kind of cool. I think that might be... Actually, why don't we just finish this one more paragraph here? I think that's probably a good stopping point. And so we're still on the perspectivism stuff, so it might just be good to chat about it. And Reisnoza, thanks so much for showing us the piece. Hans Holbein, The Ambassadors. That's a crazy looking guitar. I'm just kidding. But it's cool though. Wait, hold on. What's that skull? Is that it right there? That's what he's talking about? Such an interesting piece. Like ChatGPT messed up the prompt that I that I put into it. It's kind of funny. Yeah, celebrated death's head right there. Yeah, interesting piece. Skull is killing me. That's so funny. No, like when Midjourney bot like fails. Okay, let's do it. One might object, however, that the point of view entails a leap with the side with the side of concavity. Is there not a contradiction between the continuity of infinite variation and the discontinuity of the point of view? And is this not the same as the contradiction between the law of continuity and the principle of indiscernibles, which many authors, following Kant, will denounce in Leibniz? The objection amounts to nothing, as long as we endeavor from the start not to confuse continuity with contiguity. Singularities or singular points belong fully to the continuum, even though they are not contiguous. Points of inflection constitute a first type of singularity in extension, determining folds that enter into the measure of the magnitude of curves, increasingly smaller folds. Points of view are a second type of singularity in space, constituting envelopes following indivisible relations of distance. But neither of these contradict the other in the continuum. In inflection, there are as many points of view whose distance in each case is indivisible, as there are inflections, whose length is larger and larger. The continuum is made up of distances between points of view, no less than the length of an infinity of corresponding curves. Perspectivism is indeed a pluralism, but for this very reason it implies distance and not discontinuity. Obviously, there is no void between two points of view. Leibniz can define extension as the continuous repetition of the situs, I don't know if I'm saying that right, or position, that is, of the point of view. Not that extension is thereby the attribute of the point of view. Rather, it is the attribute of space, spatium, as the order of distances between the points of view, which renders this repetition possible. And there he's citing, following Bertrand Russell, Marcel Guerreau has often insisted on a so-called contradiction between continuity and indiscernibility. Even more curiously, elsewhere, he takes up Russell's thesis, according to which Leibniz would have sketched the notion of distance as an indivisible relation, irreducible to length and measure. Space is made of relations of distance, while extension consists of measurable sizes. Thus, this thesis assures a perfect conciliation of points of view with a continuum. See Marcel Guerreau. Yeah. And then the 45th footnote here, it says, thus extension, when it is the attribute of space, is the diffusion or continuation of the situation or locality, as the extension of the body is the diffusion or the antitype or of materiality. Interestingly, I feel like a lot of this kind of was getting at when we were talking about Zeno. Um, I, I'm wondering here if Deleuze, because he's anticipating this kind of objection here, he's trying to say that certain critics of maybe Leibniz or of this point of view says that how can you have the continuity of infinite variation always occurring, but then there's this kind of discontinuity of the point of view. So why would that be an objection made in the first place?
I think, if I'm reading this right, I think Spinoza faced a very similar objection with, insofar as he made extension an attribute of substance. I, because the critics of Spinoza would have said, well, if extension is an attribute of substance and therefore of God, then that means that God is composed of these finite parts, right, that are divisible and whatnot. But Spinoza objects, showing how this is absurd and defeats the hypothesis. It's rather extension in Spinoza is necessarily infinite and indivisible, because if it were finite, then it could no longer be a substance, because substance is not able to be divided into parts. It's it's kind of reminded me of Leibniz facing a similar objection of saying, well, how can we as finite things be part of something which is infinite and indivisible if what we are can be understood as a division of what we are saying is indivisible? So I think Leibniz is working through something very similar, if I'm reading this right, but
yeah, no, I totally think you are. I mean, I think when you have this continuity of infinite variation, we're look at that the inflection point in the curve. But then on the flip side, you have what he was talking about earlier with the points of view, and I like that quote that Patina put. I think it's great. It's the point of view is in the body. So it's almost like you're saying here, how can this body really be finite in any way, shape, or form when there is continuous, variation? So it seems like that is almost the contradiction in Leibniz, or even like you're saying, even with like Spinoza or whatever, between this infinity and in the continuity of it and the discontinuity of the point of view. But Deleuze answers that by saying this amounts to nothing as long as we endeavor not to confuse continuity with contiguity. And that's also where he's drawing from Guerreau. He says, following Russell, Guerreau has often insisted on a so-called contradiction between continuity and indiscernibility. So I'm curious as to what that distinction between the two means. I'm actually going to pull up a quick definition before we head out, and so we can discuss this of contiguity. And I just want to kind of look at these definitions side by side. The definition. Here it is. Okay, so contiguity refers to the state of being in direct physical contact, immediately adjacent, or closely connected in time or space. While continuity is the state of something continuing over time without interruption, changes, or breaks. Okay, that makes sense that these things are different. Yes. How does that respond? Does anyone have any idea? How does that respond to this critique of Leibniz? I know I see Imagine cooking a little bit here. You're missing indiscernibility. Hold on. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let's see. Indiscernible means impossible to see, hear, understand clearly. Oh, of course, Rumpel. Have a good one. Thanks for joining. Your readings have been great lately, so... Oh, he just left. Okay. So Imagine. Any idea here? I'm just kind of curious. So I think part of this though, like it is clearly talking about extension. Like this is very, like, I think what Rise Knows has said, this is very much reminding me, especially, with how Leibniz and Spinoza talked about extension. Leibniz can define extension as the continuous repetition. The continuous repetition. He's saying that not that extension is the attribute of the point of view. So when we were talking about point of view being the body, as Patina kind of said, there's something about maybe he's just trying to get at this relationship or hierarchy between point of view and extension almost, maybe? Like, is he trying to get at that? Rather, it is the attribute of space as the order of distances between points of view which renders that repetition possible. Gosh, really interesting. I feel like there's a lot being said here, but I just don't feel confident enough picking this up or understanding it. I mean, we're missing this bit here. Yeah. Imagine.
I just don't know what he means when he talks about like the distances between points of view. Like, you got like singularities are not contiguous because they're like individuated, right? They're like separate from each other. But like, what does it mean when like the continuum is made up of distances of these, I guess, separate point of views? Like, are they continuous but they're not connected? Like, is that what it means?
Well, remember, if I can help, because I feel like you might be onto something. If I can help, when we're dealing with the monad in Leibniz, monads are not touching. Monads are not in space or out of space. They are found almost like a foundational, irreducible element of reality. And you can't divide the monad at all. It is a simple substance, not a compound. And all of these monads, they're not touching each other. They don't affect each other. They don't bump into each other. For Leibniz, all of these monads, the infinite number of them, are all infinitely close together. And God allows, because of God's perfection, God has a pre-established harmony where all of the monads will operate in harmony simultaneously with one another. So if I wave my hand, it looks like my hand is moving from, left to right, for example. When in reality, God has established for Leibniz, each of the infinite monads that composes my hand are all moving at the same time. One of them maybe is started, as a darker hue, and then it goes into light, and the other one vice versa, but they're all operating like that. So I'm kind of curious here if he's responding to something here about how for Leibniz there are an infinite number of points of view because each monad has a unique perspective. So is he trying to say like the perspective of this monad here versus this monad somewhere else versus a monad that's closer to another monad or something like that. So when he's saying that continuity, the way that I'm kind of seeing it when he says singularities belong fully to the continuum, he's saying that the inflection point, for example, it's always in a process that never stops and starts. But then, you know, he's starting to talk about like contiguity, and that's where I kind of am losing him a little bit. Like I understand, at least I think, what he's talking about with the infinite curvature and the inflection point being like understood as continuous. But why does contiguity matter here? Like, what's the objection that's being made against Leibniz? He writes that the continuum is made up of distances between points of view. So I just wanted to highlight that. But yeah, imagine what you're going to say.
Yeah, so here let me paste in a picture. So in calculus, we deal with like discontinuities. So here in a
Unfortunately, I can't
calculus,
see,
oh,
but
hold on.
but I can kind of like hold over it and highlight it.
Let me just do another page. It doesn't really matter. Like they're all the same idea. So
Okay.
if you look at this function is considered this continuous because there's a jump. That's what we call a jump from like guess the left side, like from the value for the values less than 1 is one line. For the values greater than 1, it's another curve. So I guess
It's not all,
here
but these aren't connected, right? They're separate lines.
they're not
Or like,
connected, but there's still one collective function. Like they can still be defined as one function.
oh, I
So maybe
see.
here it's trying to say that like so for Leibniz, like in calculus, I just said that like as you can see for a function to be continuous, the segments of the function must be contiguous. So
Mm-hmm.
um let me see. Continuous but not differentiable function. So if you look at like these type of functions, right?
Mhm.
They you can see the continuity, but then like if it's continuous, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a perfectly smooth thing. But in order for it to be continuous, the parts of the function must be connected. So continuity means contiguity in calculus. So I don't know if
Mhm.
that I guess matters, but like I guess he says to not confuse continuity with contiguity. So
Well,
um,
continuity and contiguity are still different, right?
Mhm.
Even if it looks the same, they mean different things, right? So maybe is he saying like wait, let me see really quick. One might object, however. Yeah, so maybe thanks for showing this actually. I think this actually makes a lot of sense. It feels like if you take like a function, he's saying that for infinite variation, it needs to be continuous because like the inflection point, for example, is continuous. They that's yeah. But he says even though they are not contiguous, which to me is interesting. So he says contiguity refers to the state of being in direct physical contact. So it's almost like you should be reading the singularity, or or the inflection point, not in terms of like touching. Like we're not looking at it in terms of like even like extension almost. We're looking at it in terms of just like a process. So I'm kind of curious how that fully, like I said, how that fully resolves it. So this might just be something that we have to come back to. Yeah, Imagine writes, I don't know how these can't be separate. If something is continuous, then its parts should be in direct contact. Well, then that's the question, Imagine. How come then there's a discontinuity in points of view? Like, I think that's the way he's trying. Like, how can you have this infinite variation and how it's always continuous? But then for the point of view, there's this level of discontinuity. Does discontinuity then mean like the perspective changes? Is discontinuity here?
Or is that the inflection?
No, because I don't think so. The reason why I say that is because he writes singularities or singular points belong to the continuum. Points of inflection constitute a first type of singularity in extension. Oh, interesting. I didn't see the in extension part. So singularity, or the inflection point is a singularity in extension. But singularities belong fully to the continuum. So yeah, he's trying to resolve like this weird critique that's like it has to be what Reisnoza I think was saying with like finite modes, honestly. But something similar happening in Leibniz, where maybe Leibniz, yes, he has the monad, but if the perspective or the point of view is also like, see, but how is it finite? Because the monad, the monad isn't finite. See, this is why I'm confused with this. So I feel like we need to just come back to this final paragraph, and I think even getting help from in a theory chat from other people might be the move. Yeah, totally hate wasting everyone's time here just like thinking. I know that reading groups, I should probably like have already like looked this up more, but it's just a difficult section. Rise knows what are you thinking? Noza is typing. Okay, let's see. So I'm just kind of reading, and of course people can dip and whatnot. Or I'm not trying to keep people hostage here. I'm trying to figure this out. So well, I mean, when we're looking from a different point of view, whether it's like the body, let's just take like looking at something. Maybe we should just like bring this down to reality a little bit. It's like with the monad, there are an infinite number of points of view. So that means that like imagine, right? Like you have a point of view of a painting or something, a car, a computer. then I have a point of view of it. But they're still two different things because we're looking at it differently. So maybe the kind of criticism here is like, how can there be reality continuously unfolding in infinite variation, but then there's not a kind of point of view because there's nothing that's able to take on an infinite number of viewpoints. And it's almost like Leibniz needs God. Or like I don't know if anyone here is familiar with like George Berkeley, but like maybe Berkeley also kind of like, they need God because God can take on that infinite number of perspectives. Leibniz needs pre-established harmony in order to for him to have like a metaphysical kind of foundation. So you know, it seems like he's trying to deal with this kind of idea. It's like, how can you have infinite variation, but there is no perspective that is also infinite? Reisnoza writes, I like to highlight on the continuum is made up of distances between points of view. Continuity itself is of distance. Thus, contiguity can be separated from the continuum, and this separation is in fact necessary for this constitution of continuum. The question is how this is established. Yeah, so it's almost like like how is reality fully continuous if all of the viewpoints are different, and then for the viewpoints there's distances between them. And like you said, continuity is concerned with well, is continuity also concerned necessarily is of distance, like you're saying, or is that necessary, or is that like just a more of like a process, something like always continuously moving? So maybe what it is, Reisnoza, is like you and I are both looking at the computer screen or phone or whatever, and we both are like close to each other in a way. Like our perspectives are closer than maybe someone not looking, or maybe being unfamiliar with Deleuze. So like that's the question of contiguity, maybe. Whereas the question of continuity is just like how reality is continuously unfolding. And Deleuze is trying to say like don't want to view, I guess, those as like one and the same, because then you get like this entire mess of you get this entire mess, I guess. Um, so it's kind of what I'm thinking. I just have no idea. Imagine writes, I think it might be like this. Take the continuous function above. The individual points on the function has distance between them. From point 1, 1 to 2, 2, there is distance constituted of individuals' points. Then between those points, there is also distance. So the point of views, individual points, can be in one continuous function without actually being connected to each other. The distance between each individual point then gives the function its connected shape. In the real world, individual perspectives may not be in direct contact with each other. I'm at point A and Noah is at point B, but we're all in this world together. That's kind of an interesting point. It's like you have a function, and that can have like lines, for example, that aren't necessarily touching each other, and that there is a distance from them, but it's still the same function. And that to me makes sense. But how does Deleuze resolve this problem of Leibniz here? Because the issue is that even then, even what you're saying, imagine, it still seems like there's almost some discontinuity here between our perspectives, yet we can have a continuity of infinite variation. Like why is there not a single infinite point of view that's continuous? Is that even needed? Like George Berkeley's empiricism needs God. It needs that. Leibniz also needs God for pre-established harmony. So I'm curious if Deleuze is just like saying like, hey, these things are just different concepts and we shouldn't try and like put them together because of course that'll be a contradiction. Patina says, yeah, but we can't affirm we all share the same world without pre-established harmony. No, this is where I feel like unfortunately, I guess we haven't fully gotten there yet, but unfortunately, I feel like this is kind of the problem also with Deleuze, where it's like, yeah, Leibniz, in order for his foundation to work, he needs God, right? He needs pre-established harmony, and how does he get it? He gets it from God. God is trying to take Leibniz's monad and a lot of other stuff from Leibniz, but then kick out God from that framework. And that's Badiou's concern. His concern is you're just replacing God with a differential field. So you're still stuck at like a Neoplatonist view where everything's emanating from the one. And, you know, is anything really new in that world if it's one sheet of paper unfolding itself, creating new origami things, right? And so I don't know. I think either for now you just have to like bite that bullet, right? Like either just Deleuze's differential field is good enough and doesn't result in, the one, and that it does produce novelty, or does Deleuze smuggle the one back in, right? And so Patina, I think your question is good. Yeah, like Deleuze is going to need to do something there, and is he going to be successful in the process? I mean, for someone like Badiou, the answer is no. He's not successful, and that's why I get it. I know people dog on Badiou for all kinds of reasons, and I'm not trying to defend him as like a person or anything. I just do, you know, I do think that that's actually just a good point. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, like, are you just replacing God with another God by a different name? Imagine. Maybe he'll actually explain it in the next paragraph. Yeah. Got to keep reading, right? But yeah, I think that's, this is something where next week, if I mean, of course I want to keep the reading going, but next week, if we continue, I think totally, I'm going to take some time to review this paragraph here, because I think that this is like definitely a good stopping point. And notice on page 31, we're already at the next chapter. There's only 7-ish pages, and we actually kind of read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, okay, so we might get done with the second chapter as well. And yeah, Reisnoza says I just smuggle in Spinoza. Yeah, me too. Me too. Oh, well, thank you all for joining. Of course, I'm gonna stop sharing. Cool. Yeah, and thank you so much for joining. Like, seriously, I think that this book is so interesting and good, and I don't think I could, do it by myself. So thank you all. Yeah, Reisnoza, totally. I can actually send you Leibniz's monadology too, if you want to check it out.
Yes, please. That would be very nice, actually.
Yeah, it's 90, I think, propositions. So it's just like Spinoza. If you're a big Spinoza person, then I feel like you'd also like Leibniz's structure. So I'll send that your way.
I do. Actually, I'm in love with the way the ethics is written, but that's why Deleuze really appeals to me. I think well, one of the reasons I suppose is because Deleuze really likes to write on Spinoza's style, like just
Yeah, it's funny. Like he loves Spinoza, he loves Leibniz, he'll critique Descartes. But what a lot of these rationalists have in common is that they're incredibly structured. One thing builds from one thing, builds from one thing. Yet Deleuze's writing is the opposite of that. like, yeah. Yeah, Patina, you totally should get into Spinoza. Like, at least just read like book 1 of the Ethics. I mean, you should definitely check it out. And yes,
yeah.
I agree
Book,
that Deleuze is hyper
book one
rationalist.
has the reference I was I was making earlier to the argument that
Say that again?
modes of it. that
Mm-hmm.
extended substance is indivisible, yet we can still have finite modes of it, because these things are simply conceived within an indivisible substance as its affections. The substance is extended but indivisible, because if it were to be divided, then we would either have substances that are produced by this division, or the substance loses its nature, both of which are absurd, because that would mean that the existence or non-existence of substance is produced by something outside of it, which defeats the whole essence of substance, which is to exist by its own nature. Uh, so it's really that's really where I was going with that, but I didn't really see how that would fit in with the arguments Leibniz and Deleuze were making. So I just kind of stopped myself. But that's
No,
book one is where we find all
you
that stuff.
shouldn't. No, you shouldn't. I just feel like, he has this huge Spinoza background before he writes this book. So like to me, it's kind of obvious, like seeing where he's trying to depart and almost like build on Spinoza through Leibniz. So no, I really appreciate your comments. And I'll try and ping people earlier too to let them know about the reading. But I do have to head out. But I seriously thank you both and hope to see you next week.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Noah.
Peace out.
Goodbye.